Negative commandments associated with Shabbat. Of course, we're not allowed to do work, melacha, melechet avodah. We'll speak about that in great detail. But there is also 2 rabbinic commandments. And when I said my kiddush on Shabbat morning, I recited the verses from Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu, I think it's 56, if I'm not mistaken. It's got to be here somewhere. In which it says, "Vekarata la Shabbat oneg," and you shall declare or designate the Shabbat for oneg. It's 58, excuse me, Yeshayahu 58. Vekarata la Shabbat oneg, likdosh Hashem, to the holy of God, mechubad. Mechubad is kavod. So we have kavod and oneg, these 2 categories, which they're considered rabbinic because they appear not in the Chumash, but in the prophets. Maybe they're a very special level of rabbinic authority because they're mentioned in the prophets. Most rabbinic mitzvot are not mentioned in the prophets. So these are very significant as well categories of laws regarding Shabbat. We have Zachor, Shamor, Kavod, and Oneg. Kavod is to honor. Oneg is to delight. Delight in the Shabbat, well, it's pretty obvious. You're supposed to enjoy good food, good drink, sexual relations. This is all part of the oneg, the delight, the enjoyment of Shabbat. We are supposed to, karata la Shabbat oneg. It's a mitzvah to enjoy good pleasures on Shabbat. And the second part is the Kudosh Hashem Mechubad, to the holy of Hashem. Some people say that refers to the Yomim Tovim. They're parallel. There's Karata la Shabbat Oneg and there's Kadosh Hashem. It could be Shabbat and Yom Tov. It could be 2 parallel phrases, both referring to the Shabbat. What's Mechubad, Kavod? So Kavod, it's a little bit hard to define, but the simplest definition is, how do you honor the Shabbat? Anybody want to venture a guess? But the simplest definition of enjoyment is when you have good food on Shabbat. What is to honor the Shabbat? How do you honor the Shabbat?
Kiddush.
Kiddush, we said, is mentioning Shabbat. That's probably on a biblical level, part of Zachor. What more do we do for the Shabbat besides saying Kiddush?
Prayers.
Say again, prayers. Prayers, we said that's probably part of the Zachor. Right, that's what we were just saying in the introduction. So here we are, chapter 2. Preparing for Shabbat. How do you show something honor? When the king comes to visit, you put out the red carpet, right? You get ready with the entourage so people can sing to him and maybe a fanfare of trumpet players. Right? We have to escort the king or the queen when she comes in. So preparing for the Shabbat, even before Shabbat starts, is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of kavod, of showing respect to the Shabbat. Let me give you another example. Lighting the candles. We light the candles before Shabbat enters. There's an element of preparing for the Shabbat. We put on our Shabbat clothes before Shabbat enters. Just so you dress up to meet the king or the queen. That's how you show them respect. So you show the seventh day respect by preparing for it. So that's one way to understand that this 2 rabbinic mitzvot. One is the delightful things that we enjoy on the Shabbat, whereas kavoda, the things that we do to honor the Shabbat, to get ready. We clean the house, right? We clean ourselves. So these are all mitzvot which we do on Friday. Not even when Shabbat enters, before Shabbat enters. So the first mitzvot of Shabbat that we encounter, really, the truth is, we mentioned there is some element of Zachor. On what day of the week? Did you say your prayers this morning? Did you mention what day it is? What day is today? Yom Rishon. Hayom Yom Rishon Be Shabbat. It's the first day in the week that culminates with the Shabbat. And so we said that every time we mention the Shabbat, remember Hillel would go shopping in Shammai, they bought something for the sake of Shabbat. We're always preparing for it. So that can be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Zachor, remembering the Shabbat, commemorating it, but it's also a mitzvah of kavod of the Shabbat. So it could be every day of the week, but primarily on the day before Shabbat, obviously. We're going to cook, we're going to clean, we're going to get the house ready. These are all part of the mitzvot, the beginning of the mitzvot of Shabbat. Okay, page 27, chapter 2, section 1. Idan, take it away, please.
Shabbat preparations. The 6 weekdays and Shabbat are interconnected. Just as one has a body and a soul, so too the week has a body, the work days, and the soul, Shabbat. Just as a wholesome person's body and soul work together harmoniously, the body receives spiritual inspiration from the soul and in turn serves as the vehicle for the soul's expression. So too, an ideal week is one in which Shabbat and the weekdays are closely linked. During the week, we prepare for Shabbat, thus elevating and sanctifying the weekdays which draw their value from Shabbat. The sages recount that Shammai would always eat in honor of Shabbat. When he saw a fine animal, he would say, "This is for Shabbat." If he found an even better one, he would eat the first one and leave the better one for Shabbat. In other words, all week he would eat lower quality food, always saving the best for Shabbat. In this way, whenever he ate, he honored Shabbat and considered how he could honor and sanctify it. Hillel possessed a different trait. All his actions were undertaken for the greater glory of Shabbat, greater glory of Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
He would make a point of honoring and sanctifying the weekdays as well as Shabbat, thus fulfilling the mandate to bless Hashem every day. Therefore, when good food came his way during the week, he would eat it, trusting that just as Hashem made sure he had good food during the week, he would make sure that he would have even better food for the holy Shabbat. Thus Hillel honored and valued each day. According to halakhic authorities, even Hillel agreed that for most people it is preferable to act like Shammai and designate the best food for Shabbat. However, Hillel's trust in Hashem was exceptional, so he was certain that Hashem would provide him with better food for Shabbat. One who does not possess this degree of faith must follow Shammai and honor Shabbat by designating the best food for Shabbat. Nowadays, this law is almost irrelevant. There is such a vast selection of food in contemporary supermarkets at all times that there is no reason to think that if one eats a particular food during the week, he will not be able to find food as good for Shabbat. Therefore, today one must simply plan his shopping such that the foods for Shabbat will be the best. While shopping for Shabbat, it is most proper to articulate that this shopping is to honor the holy Shabbat, thus fulfilling the commandment of Zachor. It is also good to taste the food being prepared for Shabbat in order to season it correctly and enhance the pleasure of Shabbat.
This is a very nice custom. My kids would always come over Friday afternoon when they started to learn in the yeshiva and they realized, there's a mitzvah in Hebrew, it's to'ameha. To'ameha chayim zachu. Those who taste of it, they merit life. So they'd say to my wife who was cooking, or to myself, said, could we have some to'ameha? We'd like some tasting of the good foods being prepared for Shabbat. And then the continuation of the joke is that the verse continues, V'gam ha'ohavim divareha gidula bacharu. This is from the Shabbat morning prayers. We say the special version of the Yotzer Or Bracha. It's a poem, and it continues to say, those to'ameha chayim zachu, that those who love Shabbat have a very high level, and even those who taste of it, they merit life. V'gam ha'ohavim dvareha, even those who love the matters of Shabbat, gedula bacharu, they chose greatness. And so, okay, let's say there's chicken being prepared, and they want to taste. So you give them a little piece. They say, we really love it. Gedula bachara. We should get the big piece of chicken, not just the small one. So the scholars enjoy this mitzvah of tasting on Erev Shabbat. And ostensibly, it's just to make sure that the food is tasty, that doesn't need salt or it's not spoiled, and so you have to make sure that everything's ready. But this is all, of course, happening before Shabbat starts. The mitzvah of preparing for Shabbat. Okay, Friday. He says we're not going to get into all the details. Continue a little bit, Idan. Although there is a certain amount.
Although there is a certain amount of preparation for Shabbat that should go on all week, the primary time to prepare is on Friday, as is stated. But on the sixth day they prepared what they have brought in. Just as in the desert, first thing Friday morning, the Jews gathered the manna that had fallen the previous night, so too it is a mitzvah to be industrious and to prepare for Shabbat on Friday morning. It is an admirable custom for women to wake up early on Friday, bake challah bread for Shabbat, and perform the mitzvah of half kafreshat challah.
Right, separating off a little piece of dough.
Mm-hmm. Even though there is a mitzvah to shop early Friday, one should not do so before Shabbat. Similarly, if one normally studies Torah after praying, he should keep this routine and then immediately purchase food and prepare for Shabbat. One may go shopping before Shabbat only if there is a real concern that if he waits, there will not be food for Shabbat left in the store. Achronim have written that it is preferable to buy food for Shabbat on Friday than Thursday, since it is more apparent on Friday that the purchases are being made to honor Shabbat. There is also another reason. In the past, when there was no refrigeration, there was no way to keep food fresh. Therefore, to make sure Shabbat food would be of superior quality, one had to shop and cook on Friday. However, if there are foods that might not be available on Friday, or whose preparations are very time-consuming, they can be purchased on Thursday. This was true then and is certainly true now. If one is faced with two possibilities, cooking all the food on Friday and being exhausted Friday night, or cooking on Thursday, refrigerating the food and entering Shabbat calmly, he should finish cooking on Thursday and leave some small things to be done on Friday. This is because the primary mitzvah is to honor and enjoy Shabbat. So it is important that he enter it in an alert and relaxed state of mind. There are families where there is so much tension involved in trying to get everything done before Shabbat that Friday becomes an aggravating day, full of arguments and anxiety. As it were, there are satanic forces at work trying to foment anger and disagreement and prevent Israel from welcoming Shabbat properly and peacefully. The Talmud tells of a couple who would have horrible fights each week before Shabbat. Rabbi Meir was visiting their neighborhood, and for 3 weeks he visited them on Friday until he made peace between them. He then heard the voice of a prosecuting angel lamenting, "Woe is me, Rabbi Meir has chased me out of this home." In order to avoid giving this angel an opening, one must organize Shabbat preparations so well that he welcomes Shabbat joyfully and peacefully. There is a holy custom to finish all Shabbat preparations by midday on Friday and then to rest and study Torah in the afternoon. All who follow this custom are privileged to welcome Shabbat joyfully and peacefully and become truly aware of the Neshama Yetera given them on Shabbat.
The additional soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've been to homes on Friday afternoons. Have you seen a hectic Jewish home on Friday afternoon? You've seen? You've been?
Shabbat.
Okay.
In here, there's also my brother's house.
Yeah, at
So
your brother's
busy.
house. It's very busy Friday afternoon. You're trying to get everything done. You got children. They all have to get washed. They all have to get their clothes. And this one's missing a shoe, and this one. And then the soup has to be put onto the plata, and then you have to set the clocks. Sometimes there's a Shabbat clock. We'll learn about that. A timer. So and your time's on. It's getting dark. In Jerusalem, you have a siren. I hear that siren. I mean, you have to light candles. But I didn't shower yet. Why didn't you shower? Why did you? Start to get into arguments. starts to get, that's the Yetzer Hara. That's the angel, prosecuting angel, who's trying to get you to be very, very careful not to get angry on Shabbat, on Erev Shabbat. And if possible, prepare ahead of time. That's why, even though the title of this section is called Friday, because in the books, it does speak about, how Friday morning you got ready for Shabbat, and Friday's a day of preparation. Nowadays, it makes more and more sense. You could see that he's leaning towards prepare earlier. Do it on Thursday. Put it in the fridge. If you need to shop for Shabbat, do it on Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There's no reason you have to go with all the lines and all the crowded people last minute shopping for Shabbat. You've got a refrigerator. You've got a freezer. Be prepared. The more you're prepared for Shabbat, the better it is. It doesn't have to be on Friday. Friday, of course, it shows you that you're preparing for Shabbat, but many times it's a trap. It's a trap, leaving things for Friday. You think, I'm going to make things beautiful for Shabbat, and it'll be so clear that I'm getting ready for Shabbat. It ends up being the opposite. It ends up being too much pressure. Of course, you can't bathe for Shabbat before Friday. Okay. You can't get dressed for Shabbat before Friday. But everything else, whatever you can, do as early as you can, unless you have no danger and there's not too much to do, and you're sure that everything can be done in peace and in calm relaxation on Erev Shabbat, then by all means, you prepare for Shabbat. Did I just mention to you the other day that there's a mitzvah to read the Parsha twice and the Targum once every week? And I said some people do it every day, one of the sections of the week, right? One of the portions of the Parsha. And some people do it on Friday afternoon, right? Some yeshiva boys, they're busy learning Gemara a week, and so on. So Friday afternoon, that's the only time they get, and so they're doing their Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum. Sometimes it's too busy on Friday afternoon, but if you plan your time well, you can get ready for Shabbat. And but doing something for the honor of Shabbat. If you're not cooking, and you're not cleaning, and you're not bathing, so do the learning in preparation for Shabbat. Don't make it like every other day, but it's part of getting ready for Shabbat. It's part of the mitzvah of kavod, the honoring for Shabbat. Okay, next, we're going to skip the next section. It's about buying food. We just talked about it, how you should prepare ahead of time. There is a little bit about how much do you pay? How much money? If you look on page 31, it says, in the second paragraph, one who does not have money available to buy food for Shabbat should borrow money in order to make Shabbat enjoyable. Should not worry that something will happen to prevent them from repaying the loan. God assures his people, children, borrow money and sanctify the day. Trust me, for I will repay it. Of course, one of the Shabbat Zmirot, Ulevu alai banai, ve'idenu badanai. Take a loan from me, take a loan on my account. I'm the guarantor, God says. This is the Midrash, Gemara in Beitza. It says that you can take a loan and repay it. This is on condition, says Rabbi Melamed, that one does not rely on a miracle. Taking a loan that you can repay. Okay, payday's next week. I know I'm a little short now, but I'm going to close a deal next week. So then, by all means, take a loan. And if you're worried, maybe the deal won't close, you can have trust that everything will go. But if you have no hope of repaying the loan, then that's the next paragraph. One who does not know how he will repay his debt must not borrow money to make Shabbat enjoyable, because he may become a wicked person who does not repay his debts. He should not ask for charity. Rather, he should eat simple food on Shabbat, following Rabbi Kiva's recommendation. Make your Shabbat like a weekday. Do not rely on others. Otherwise, don't make yourself a dependent and somebody who is, overburdened by debt, who can't repay it. So that don't get confused. It doesn't mean you can just spend irresponsibly for Shabbat. You have to spend responsibly, but you can, if you have a plan, you can and should try to make something, to have some more enjoyable food for Shabbat. We had a special treat this Shabbat, thanks to my mother-in-law. I think I mentioned my mother-in-law has been staying with us now. Because of the war, she shouldn't be alone. So one of the perks is that she goes to the supermarket with us and she pays. So we bought lamb. We don't usually, it's so expensive, we don't usually buy lamb. But this time, it was her treat. So we had a very nice special meat for Shabbat, on Shabbat. If possible, if you can, it's a mitzvah to enjoy the Shabbat, and you spend more than you usually do on Shabbat food as more than what you would during the week. Okay, so far so good? Section 4. Moving right ahead. We're not going to read every line. We won't ever finish in the few weeks that we have by reading every line. So, honoring Shabbat via clothing. So I was taught once that you have every Jew, if possible, if you're rich enough, you have 5 levels of clothing. Fanciest is for? No. No. So it goes like this. You have your weekday clothes. And then you have, I guess, maybe Chol HaMoed clothes. So it's like half weekday and half Yom Tov. And then you have Yom Tov clothing. Sorry. Then you have Shabbat clothing. Yom Tov clothing is supposed to be even higher than Shabbat. And higher than, forget about Chol HaMoed. I'll take it back. I'll start again. Weekday, Shabbat. Weekday and Shabbat. Above that is supposed to be Yom Tov clothing. Even nicer, even fancier than your regular Shabbat clothing. It happens only 3 times a year, right? Or 5 times a year if you include Rosh Hashanah. And then, 4 times a year. And then, above Yom Tov, even fancier, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a Yom Tov. It's a happy day. We talked about it, that we're being forgiven for our sins, so we're happy. So you wear nice clothes on Yom Kippur. And above that, number 1, most fanciest dress that you should have is for a wedding. To dress up for a wedding, yeah. It's a joyous time, and the festivity increases the joy of the chatan and the kala. It's such a great mitzvah. You're supposed to have clothes even fancier for a wedding than for Shabbat.
Somebody else's wedding.
Yeah, when you're attending somebody else's wedding, yeah, not necessarily your own. Your own, also your own. But when you're just attending a wedding, you're supposed to get all dressed up. That honors and that enhances the joy of the mitzvah. Okay, Dov. But for sure, you're supposed to have a level of clothing which is above the weekday clothes for Shabbat. A lot of people don't appreciate that enough, how important it is to have Shabbat clothes. And you'll see some people who are just maybe beginners, maybe Chazir B'Tshuva, didn't grow up in a religious home. They don't have the concept necessarily. I grew up, Baruch Hashem, we had different shoes for Shabbat, for the weekday. That's part of enhancing the Shabbat attire. You have weekday shoes and you have Shabbat shoes. Just like you have weekday pants and weekday shirts and Shabbat pants and Shabbat shirts. In some places, the custom is to put on a suit for Shabbat and a tie. Some places, everybody's different customs. Of course, there are Hasidim who have special religious garb, the shtreimel or the bekesher, whatever it is. But the point is to have special, fancier clothing for the Shabbat. In this community, the Machon Meir religious Zionist community, what's the Shabbat dress? A white shirt, correct. During the week, I don't always wear a white shirt. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But on Shabbat, I try to always wear a white shirt. In some communities, they wear a white shirt every day. So you'd have to do something more, something different to honor the Shabbat. It depends on your standard. There's no set, you don't have to wear a turban, for example, on Shabbat. Or Hasidim wear a shtreimel. Yeah, a fur hat.
You are not supposed to have clothes with stain like this.
You should not have clothes with stains, especially nobody should have. You should dress respectfully. You are a dignified human being, and not only that, you're a Jew. So a Jew should dress appropriately, dignified, and not only that, everybody in this room is a religious Jew. And not only are you religious, you're a religious Jew who studies Torah. So there is a tradition in the Talmud that says that if a Talmid Chacham, somebody who's known to be in the community, is known to be as a scholar, I would say yeshiva student, if he has one stain on his clothing, it's a desecration of God's name. Wow. So we have to be even more careful about to dress dignified. If we involve ourselves with dignified things, obviously, if I was spending my day and night, working as a garbage collector, it's a wonderful job, pays the bills, but clearly you get dirty all the time, and so you wear dirty clothes, or a painter, so you don't have to wear dignified clothes. If you're studying Torah, of course we should wear dignified clothes. That's what you're quoting to me. The Talmud says, oh, if you have one stain, it's a big problem, especially if you're a Torah scholar. Nowadays, the custom is that we wear these beanies, skull caps, yarmulkes, kippah, all these various different kinds, colors, and hats, and that's a signifying symbol that we're religious Jews, that we're observant. So that's a social marker. And so people look at somebody who's wearing a kippah and they see he's all disheveled and he's dirty and he's not dignified. That reflects poorly on the religion, on the religious people. So there's all sorts of awarenesses that we have to be aware. But nonetheless, obviously, when you're doing sports, you wear sport attire. When you're doing, you're in the kitchen, you're going to be wearing an apron, right? It's not like you always have to be dressed in a three-piece suit. You dress appropriately for your activity, but you have to be aware to dress properly and with dignity. And especially if you're a Torah scholar, you have to be. It happens. We all get dirty. Sometimes I get dirty in the middle of the day. It happens. I spill. I'm a slob. I spill on myself all the time. But try to keep it clean as much as we can. All right. There was in the last few weeks, beautiful, beautiful stories. I think it's the only army in the world where, in the middle of a war, more and more people are getting married. You see the soldiers getting married in their uniforms. Instead of the beautiful hall with all the fancy clothing, and they do it on base. Because it's a symbol of life, that we're not giving up. We're going to get through this mess and make families and have children. And it's a wonderful, wonderful phenomenon, showing that the Jewish people love life so much. But yes, it's true. We see that maybe the bride is not wearing a white dress, because she's a soldier too. She's wearing her uniform and she has to be carrying her gun. We're in the middle of a war. Now it's a little bit of a hiatus, but at any moment it could flare up, and some people are fighting nonstop. But there's something special, though, about the Israeli army uniform. In our tradition, if you're fighting a holy war, fighting for the sake of the Jewish people, it's a mitzvah. So these clothing take on the attributes of being very dignified. They're mitzvah clothing. Something that's a beautiful thing to wear when you get married. Matter of fact, the chief rabbi of Haifa passed away, Rav Shai Yeshuva Kohen, the son of the Nazir. He chose to get married in his uniform. He didn't have to. He was he was in between and out. He was captured as a prisoner of war by the Jordanians or the Syrians. And he got out, but he was in and out of the army. And when he got married, it was during one of those furloughs from his army station. And he chose to wear the uniform of the soldiers of the IDF. And this is what he became a chief rabbi. He's a very big Talmid Chacham, very rabbinic family. And so there are special types of garb for Shabbat in special circumstances.
Rabbi,
Yes?
Question.
Yeah.
Regarding, I know this soldier, they're getting married. The Torah says when they get married, they shouldn't go to the war, right?
The Torah says that.
Yeah, but how does this...
So when we read that section of the Torah in Parshat Kitetse, it's amazing, or it's in Shoftim, I think, in the book of Dvarim, all of the commentators explain that these verses in the Torah, which everybody knows, the Torah gets to go home for a year, it should be somebody building a house, he gets to get free. Those exemptions are only true about a regular war, which countries sometimes go to war. But when it's a war of mitzvah, there's a category called Menachem mitzvah. When it's a mitzvah war, an obligatory war, 3 examples are the ancient wars of conquering the 7 nations, in the time of Yoshua, right? And fighting Amalek. This was the biblical time. But the 3rd type of obligatory war is to save the Jewish people from its enemies. So that one applies. That doesn't have to be a thing of the ancient times. Right now we're fighting a Milchemet Mitzvah. What's that called in Hebrew? Milchemet Mitzvah? Of helping the Jewish people from their distress? Ezrat Yisrael Miyad Tzar. Hey, helping the Jewish people. Shalom Aleichem. Shiran. Welcome, Shiran. From where?
Toronto.
Oh my gosh.
No, but it was
There's still Jews in Toronto? I left Toronto about 30 years ago. There's still some Jews left? Many. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, Hashem. Thank you. Seda. Machuz. Tov. Chaka. Kom Seda. Shiran, welcome.
Thank you.
Toronto. Where in Toronto?
Downtown, actually.
Downtown. Where?
Lansdowne and Bloor.
That's not a Bloor. Well, my mother grew up on Bloor Street. Bloor and Bathurst, of course.
Bloor, Bathurst.
Approximately, yeah.
I didn't live around Bathurst, unfortunately. So that's why I came here.
That's it. Baruch Hashem. How long you been in Israel now?
Since January.
Okay, good. You finally made it home to Machon Meir. All right. How old are you, Shiran?
I just turned 23.
23, perfect. You're bringing up the younger part of this group. Idan, how old are you? 28. Okay. Okay. The rest of us are getting white. No, Yosef is 28 also? 30? 33. Okay. Every 5 years we have a student. That's good. Anyways.
I
see.
am 84. 84.
Nice. Very nice. From 23 to 84. 60 years, this is everybody else is in the middle. That's it. Baruch Hashem. In good health. Okay. So anyways, we're talking a little bit about the Shabbat, and we talked about how you have to wear special clothes for Shabbat. Fancier than during the weekday. Even if you change just one article of clothing, that's good enough. By the way, I not only do I put on a white shirt for Shabbat, I also put on a white kippah for Shabbat. I have a different kippah, I have different shoes, I have different tzitzit. I have a nicer pair of tzitzit for Shabbat. It's an enhancement. You don't have to do that, but every other way, you should try to always be aware that the way we honor the Shabbat is the way we dress. And then we got into the question of, what about a soldier? So we also said that you wear fancy clothing to a wedding. The most fancy clothing that you have, you wear to a wedding. Some soldiers nowadays are getting married in the middle of the war, and they're wearing their uniforms. And there's a special beauty to the Jewish uniform, the Jewish army. The Jewish army is doing a mitzvah. And that mitzvah of a obligatory war, milchemet mitzvah, one of the 3 categories, which is applicable today more than ever, is that we have to save the Jewish people from its enemies. Everybody was called up because we're being attacked. by murderous monsters, and so hundreds of thousands of soldiers were called up to the army and we're fighting against the murderers who are trying to kill innocent Jewish people and capturing babies and elderly, and it's just of course it's a big mitzvah, and that mitzvah overrides even somebody who just got married. The Talmud says very clearly, afilu chatan michedro vekala mechupata. Even a chatan, take him out from his chuppah, and the bride from her bridal room. They have to go if they have something to do to fight, if they're able to fight. An obligatory war overrides those psukim in the book of in Shoftim and Kitetse, where the usual that's a regular war, where sometimes the country's at war, and so there's exemptions, but not when it's a milchamet mitzvah. So everybody has to go. It's a beautiful thing. The bravery, the dedication that we've seen, people going, from really right after their wedding, going to the battle, unfortunately, sometimes getting injured and even worse. But this is the mitzvah. It's very clear. Yeah.
Except to praying for the sacred zone soldiers, what else one person can do?
Good question. What can we do when we're not a soldier? We want to help the soldiers, so we want to help the war effort. So praying is a big thing we can do. We're definitely praying for them. There's a lot of volunteering. There's a lot of people all around the country that are trying to help in many ways. You could help. What do we have? We have the home command, right? There's the war that happens on the front, where the guns and missiles are being shot, and but there's also, because this is a war against terrorists, the whole idea of terrorists is that you attack the civilian population and you terrorize the civilian population. So we're all under attack, even those who are not directly under the bullets, under the gun. I haven't had one siren where I live. We're still terrified. And in Jerusalem, you even had some sirens. So everybody in the country is under tremendous stress and insecurity. And there's a lot of good that can be done. A lot of help can be done. You can give help to the soldiers. There are volunteers that are, buying food for the soldiers when they don't have enough until they hundreds of thousands of people, all of a sudden the army has to feed. It takes a while for them to organize themselves. My son, I know for a personal example, they gave him food, but they gave him what's called Menachem, manot krav. They have special pre-prepared food for wartime. It's barely edible. I mean, it's food, it'll fill you. You get your nutrients, but it's like cans and, dried, preserved stuff. That is for a time of war when you have nothing else to eat. That's what you eat. But if we're able to supply the soldiers with better food and better conditions, and sometimes they need additional things. They rushed out of there. I took my son out of my house. He took half an hour to organize himself. I gave him my belt because he couldn't find his army belt. So that's my effort my donation to the war effort. I had just bought a great belt, and he says, I spoke to him on the phone, Baruch Hashem, he's okay. He said to me, I think of you often because I wear your belt. So there's many things that we can give to the soldiers, but also we can give to the civilians who are under pressure, not to mention the evacuees. So probably over 100,000 Israelis that are not in their homes right now. Tens of thousands that are on the border towns, both in the north, now in the south. I just read in the morning that they expanded the area in the north, which are also going to be evacuated. I mean, they evacuated Sderot, and they're on the cusp of evacuating Ashkelon. These are towns of 100,000 people. Sderot, it's 100,000 people. They're evacuated by law. That means that the government is paying for hotels. Now, this morning, they said an extra 15 villages in the north, a little bit farther from the border. They're going to a hotel, a youth hostel. It's not a hotel, not talking about 5-star, but very nice that they have a roof over their heads. Where are they going to do their laundry? Where are they going to have change of clothing? Where are they going to have toys for the kids to play with? Where are they going to get new toothbrushes? And they left their homes with, very quickly, just to get out of the line of fire. And so there's a lot that we can do in the civilian arena, the home front, as it's called, the home front, where we can help out. Hospitals. There are hundreds of people that are injured from the war and from the shootings that are still in the hospitals. There's a hospital, in Israel, it's a multicultural country, for sure. Many of the doctors and nurses are Arabs, and many of the orderlies and the cleaning staff are Arabs as well. And many of them stopped coming to work. Many of them are not allowed to come to work because we're afraid that their loyalties are not where they should be. And so there was a hospital, I read about this hospital, where the manager of the hospital said, I didn't know what I was going to do. I've got, hundreds of patients, more than ever, with emergencies coming to the emergency room and surgeries, and I had no cleaning staff. And in came a group of youth from Bnei Akiva, religious youth, 100 of them. They cleaned the hospital. It's big, cleaner than it's ever been in years. And the volunteers, it's all volunteers. So the youth had no school for the first 2 weeks. Now they're going to start to go back. I don't know what's going to happen. But people who are able-bodied and able to go ahead and volunteer physically, there's tons of stuff to do.
They come to me.
They came to you. Wonderful. Oh, beautiful. They cleaned your house for you?
No, they want to see how I...
Just to see how you are. Good. Very good. Yeah. There's
feel.
lots of elderly people that are alone, that are scared, that they maybe don't understand what's going on. They don't know where to run when there's a siren. There's so much to do. There's so much to do. Ask me, what can we do as civilians as part of the war effort? So there's a lot of volunteering. And somebody who can't physically himself go with his hands, somebody who's busy learning Torah, Baruch Hashem, so we can give in other ways. People give it, millions of dollars have been given, donations, so that these organizations can run. All these volunteer organizations providing all this material goods and supplies. It costs a lot of money. All these even the places to stay, people are giving their homes. People have an extra home, a summer home in Israel. There's a whole organization to connect the people that have homes that are not living here. Let the evacuees live there. And so there's so much giving that can be done. But don't make light, though, of what we're doing right here. You said praying and learning Torah is part of the war effort. We said it the other day. It's very important that we, and all of civilian society should continue to do what they're doing as much as possible. To have the economy run, to have some sense of normalcy. Otherwise, people will just go further, deeper into their anxiety and their stress. And so keeping things as much as possible normal is a mitzvah, especially learning Torah, the spiritual power that we believe that the Jewish people have by learning Torah is giving strength to all of our soldiers on the front. And it's a beautiful thing. I know firsthand from my son, many of the soldiers, in between their exercises and in between when they are not busy doing what they have to be doing, he's learning Torah. He's doing his Daf Yomi. He's doing his Mishnah a day. He's doing his daily portions of learning. Shnai Mikra Vecha Targum. Right? Read the Parsha twice and once in translation. We talked about it the other day. Got to go on if you're able to, if you're not busy with the actual tasks which you have to do, preparing or actually fighting. Some soldiers, a great rabbi, amazing, young and upcoming rabbi who's a wonderful educator and very popular, written already 5 books. He's like 30 years old, already written 5 books, but he's a soldier. He's in the artillery. And he has his phone with him, luckily, and so he's posting on Facebook. He hasn't showered in 2 weeks. They don't have showers for them. Until finally they arranged that they found they let them shower. My son hasn't showered in 2 weeks. He showered before Shabbat. He was so excited he found a garden hose. Gave himself a shower with a garden hose. Because they had heard that they're going to get showers before Shabbat. There's going to be some gym, some athletic center was going to let them use, but it fell through. So he showered with the garden hose for Shabbat. Now we're going to talk about getting ready for Shabbat. You do the best you can. But even there, he's wearing his uniform. Hopefully he put on his nicer uniform for Shabbat. You do whatever you can, a little bit, to make it. And then he was... they had Shabbat services with hundreds of soldiers. My son was the Chazan, he tells us, and then he wanted there to be at the meal. There should be a Dvar Torah. So he said, okay, so you say Dvar. So he said a Dvar Torah. 23-year-old kid. Baruch Hashem, strong. Very proud of him. Anyways, back to learning. Okay, this is something we can do for sure. We talked about the clothing for Shabbat. Let's go ahead. Preparing oneself and one's home. That's section 5, page 33. So let's read from the top. Yosef, will you read for us?
Honoring Shabbat by preparing oneself and one's home. It says 1 must prepare nice, clean clothing for Shabbat. So 2, 1 must prepare one's body for Shabbat. This is part of the mitzvah of honoring Shabbat. Thus, the sages state that it is a mitzvah to take a hot bath or shower before Shabbat, because hot water cleans better. One who uses cold or lukewarm water does not fulfill the mitzvah. In the past, when it was difficult to lug water inside in order to wash, the mitzvah was limited to washing one's face, hands, feet, and hair. Those who went above and beyond washed their entire bodies in hot water. But nowadays, when we have showers and electric water boilers, it is a mitzvah to wash one's whole body with hot water. If one normally washes his whole body for a social event, certainly going to greet the Shabbat queen deserves the same care. One should not shower or bath too close to Shabbat so as to avoid the possibility of unknowingly desecrating Shabbat by turning off the bathroom light or turning off the switch that controls the hot water heater. Common failure in Israeli homes. After Shabbat has already begun. The positive of washing clothes to Shabbat is outweighed by the risk of desecrating Shabbat. We're
going to talk about one of the rules of Shabbat is that you're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to cook hot, even water. So when in all of our homes we have hot water heaters that cook the water, that heat up the water inside the tap, right? Behind the tap is there's a machine, there's an electric heater, and we try not to use it. We're not allowed to use it on Shabbat. So if it gets too close to Shabbat, maybe it's already after dark, and you're not allowed to shower. So you think, oh, but I want to shower for Shabbat. Some people are not so halachically aware. They know that what do we do for Shabbat? We light Shabbat candles, right? Unfortunately, some people, they want to honor the Shabbat, so they light the Shabbat candles. Oh, but they're about to start to make Kiddush, they're about to start the meal. Oh, we forgot to light the candles, so they light them now. If it's after dark, don't light those candles. Violate Shabbat. It has to be done before Shabbat starts. So too, using the hot water. We get a haircut, shave if you do. You cut your nails if possibly in honor of the Shabbat on Friday. And then it says at the bottom, page 33, I'm just skipping a little bit, the home must also be prepared for Shabbat. It should be cleaned. Table should be set with a nice tablecloth. Everything should be ready. There's a passage in the Talmud that tells about the angels. Skip to the next page, page 34. 2 ministering angels. You want to read it, Yosef?
Yeah. 2 ministering angels accompany one home from the synagogue on Friday night. One good and one wicked. If he arrives home and the candles are lit, the table is set and the bed is made, the good angel says, "May it be His will that it will be this way next Shabbat as well." And the wicked angel is forced to respond, "Amen." If this is not the case, the wicked angel says, "May it be His will that it be this way next Shabbat as well." And the good angel is forced to respond, "Amen."
So on Shabbat, holiness can come to its full expression in the material and the spiritual realms. This is why, with the house clean and the table set, even the wicked angel is forced to respond, "Amen." Okay, so we have to get the house ready so that this spirituality is expressed in the physical home as well. Of course, don't get into a fight about it. Don't. We start talking about the tensions in every Shabbat. If at all possible, be ready early as much as possible. Sometimes you go into the home at 12 in the afternoon on Friday, and you see that everything's all ready. I have a student here. I think he wouldn't mind me saying. Our friend Yechiel. We're going to see that it's a mitzvah to light candles for Shabbat. We talked about it. We're going to talk about the details. But really, who has to light the Shabbat candles? Everybody. Everybody has to light the candles, even a man. If a man doesn't have if his mother's not lighting candles for him, if his wife is not lighting those candles for him, he has to light candles for himself. The mitzvah of lighting Shabbat candles, it's a mitzvah that devolves upon every Jew. Usually, the woman of the house does it. But wait, I want to be part of the mitzvah too. So you know what I do? I prepare the candles. Boker Tov. Wow.
The name had bar mitzvah.
Wow. Happy birthday to the neighbor. Mazal tov. Toda rabba. There's a knife there? Because I have a knife here. Two knives.
One for this side, one for that side.
L'chaim. One is fleshach, one's milchik? One's for men, one for women? Okay. Oh, okay. Teavon. Yefe. Okay, whoever wants cake can take it. Yeah, why don't you do the cutting? Is it Shiran, right? Shiran. Oh, you're the closest one, so yeah. Help yourself and pass them around. B'teavon, yafe. So what was I saying?
About candle lighting.
The candle lighting, I want to participate, even though my wife does the mitzvah for me. So I prepare the candles. When do I usually do it? Friday afternoon. Yechiel says, you know when he prepares the candles? Motzei Shabbat. For the next week. He wants to be prepared. We talked about getting ready for the next Shabbat from Sunday. We say, Yom Rishon b'Shabbat. None for me, thanks. You keep going. So whenever you do, but this is getting the Shabbat ready, is part of the mitzvah of honoring the Shabbat.
And he's tall, so he don't need the stairs.
Yafa, he's tall, right. This is the next section. It says that, take a look on page 35. Page 35, take a look. The Torah states on the sixth day they shall prepare that they have brought in. This was about the man. It's inferred from here that there's a mitzvah to prepare for Shabbat on Friday, even a rich and dignified person who has servants who take care of all of his needs during the week, does not lift a finger around the house, must try to do something himself to honor Shabbat. He should not say, should I toil in all these simple labors that are beneath my dignity? No. Rather, he must be aware that it is an honor for him to honor the holy Shabbat by preparing for it. And the Talmud tells of great rabbis who would chop vegetables, salt the fish, chop wood. Rabbi Abahu would light the fire. Rabbi Huna and Rabbi Papa, these are the great sages from the Talmud that each personally were involved, even though they were great sages, perhaps, studying Torah with every waking moment. They took the time out to personally be involved in getting ready for the Shabbat. Okay. Nowadays, some of the things you have to be sure to do is to set the timers and put the food on the plata. And with the refrigerator, some of them have a Shabbat mode, or you turn off the light. In other types of refrigerators, we'll talk about those details later. Okay? Moving ahead to page 36, section 7, it says that you're not allowed to eat a large meal on Shabbat because you're supposed to be hungry for the Shabbat. Don't want to spoil your appetite. So we try not to have big meals on Friday, if at all possible, after midday. Some people didn't eat at all on Fridays. Some people I know don't eat at all on Fridays. If you're going to be able to do everything else you need, well, that will enhance your Shabbat enjoyment for sure. But it's a tricky business. Fasting, we should plan your meals on Friday such that you'll begin Shabbat hungry and enjoy the Friday night meal. Okay? As a matter of fact, not only is you're not supposed to have a big meal, you're not supposed to do melacha on Friday. Melacha? Melacha, work. Work. I know when I was working in Toronto, in the non-Jewish country, Friday is a regular weekday. 9 to 5, I worked at a bank. 9 to 5. 5 o'clock, it's already dark in the winter. So I had to get special permission. I told them, sorry, I can't. I have to leave work early on Friday afternoon because I got to get home in time for Shabbat. I can't travel with Shabbat. I can't, for sure, I can't work. I can't even travel. I need the extra hour to get to my home and I need to shower and change into my Shabbat clothes. At the time, I was living with my parents. They did all the preparations for Shabbat. So all I had to do was just get there. But even that, I had to leave work early. We'll leave work at 3, 2, to make sure to get the... What can you do? You don't work on Shabbat and you have to get home by sundown. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. Also, some people, they have a store. They want to keep the store open as much as possible. Every hour they have the store open, that's a livelihood for their families. Can't keep the store open when Shabbat is approaching. So you have to be ready. The truth is, the sages prohibit working on Friday afternoon altogether, if possible. If you can avoid it, it's up to you. Close the store at 12, when as soon as it becomes noon. Work only half a day on Friday. And he says, you'll not be blessed with success with any work that you do on Friday afternoon. But he says it usually goes into effect in Mincha Ketana. Some people say Mincha Gedola, which is closer to midday. We can rely on the lenient opinion and go until an hour, what does he say, 2.5 hours before sunset, right? 2.5 hours before sunset.
Seasonal hour?
Yeah. But the bottom line is, you should not ignore that Shabbat is coming in the afternoon, and there's a question, but all sorts of other things that you do that constitute malacha. It's not absolutely forbidden, as long as, if you look on the bottom, page 38, it says one may engage in regular work, including paid work on Friday afternoon, if it is clear that this work is done in the service of Shabbat. You're doing, for example, getting a haircut. You can shave or get a haircut on Shabbat afternoon because you're preparing for Shabbat. Or if you're fixing up the clothing that you're going to wear on Shabbat, that's allowed. And also, on page 39 is, I think, more common. There are 2 additional cases which the sages allow people to undertake regular work on Friday afternoon. A poor person who does not have enough money to buy Shabbat necessities may continue to work, and anyone may work then in order to avoid damage or loss. Aha! If they're going to fire you from your job if you say, I can't work on Friday afternoon, then it's not a regular case. As long as you are able to get home before, without violating the Shabbat, if you must work, you can, but you have to leave time to get washed and get dressed if at all possible. Nowadays we're a little more, workplaces are much more into flex time, and at least in the Western world, if you, but it's good to stipulate. My grandfather, Zaidi, his name was Louis Rosenfield. He was a wonderful, warm man. I remember him. He died when I was 10 years old. He had a gold tooth and warm hands, and But what I'm told about him is that my grandparents were never very rich. And the reason was because when he came over to America, like many Jews from Poland, this was even before the Second World War, Baruch Hashem. He came over first and then eventually brought his parents and his siblings. And so the family lived in Canada. But when he came over to Canada, he was one of the only Jews that he couldn't keep a job. He got a job, did good work, and on Friday afternoon he said goodbye. I'm going Shabbos, I'm not coming tomorrow. And they would say to him, if you don't come tomorrow, don't come on Sunday either. That's it. So he started one job for a week, started another job. It lasted a week. He said the same thing. Fridays, I'm not coming on Shabbat. He said, okay, don't come on Sunday either. You had to work on Shabbat. It was a big challenge. And many of the Jews could not stand up to it. They needed to feed their families. They're in a foreign country. This is the way it works. They couldn't keep Shabbat anymore, even if they wanted to. My grandfather was dedicated, and he didn't break Shabbat. And that's why he became a traveling salesman. He didn't work for anybody. He worked for himself. It wasn't a great job. He had to, in the cold winter of Toronto with snow, he went from door to door selling whatever, textiles and all sorts of different things. He tried to figure out what he could, and he made a living. He made a living, Baruch Hashem. But it wasn't as good as it could have been because he was dedicated to keeping Shabbat. And it's a challenge. Nowadays, Baruch Hashem, a lot of the industry doesn't work on Shabbat anymore. Not even because of Jewish reasons, but there's still challenges. I have a student who is trying to work in cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is this particular industry where they need you to work 24/7. Because the attacks, cyber attacks are even on Shabbat, and there's shift work. So if you're a medical professional, you're allowed to do life-saving medical procedures on Shabbat. So you're allowed to work on Shabbat. But if you're not in that profession, if it's not a question of a medical issue, you shouldn't be working on Shabbat. Police, something else. Police, army, of course. Those people, if we didn't have a police or an army, we wouldn't be able to live here. So,
you're protecting a hospital on Shabbat.
And they're protecting a hospital for sure.
Cyber attacks, preventing or stopping a cyber attack, stopping the Iranians on Shabbat.
It's true. It's true. There's thousands and thousands of people that are working on Shabbat totally permissibly, because if it's for the sake of security, they're allowed to. They must. It's a mitzvah even if they weren't getting paid. The truth is, there's a problem getting paid for the work you do on Shabbat, even if you're doing it for a mitzvah. For example, I always like to joke, who always works on Shabbat? The rabbi. Right? He gives his speeches, he teaches, that's when the community comes. So the rabbi works. How can the rabbi work on Shabbat? So obviously he's doing God's work. But still, the payment and the chazan, any chazanim get paid. A caterer, he's making the kiddush, serving it. He's got workers, all those waiters. They have to get paid. Not enough volunteers to support a whole industry of catering. So how do they get paid? So there's a trick. We're going to learn about it later. But there's a trick. And essentially, they're not allowed to get paid for the work done on Shabbat. So we pay them more for the work preparing before Shabbat and after Shabbat. That's only in the case where it's for the sake of a mitzvah. For the sake of a mitzvah, we're lenient about the payment. But still, when they're working, they can't violate the Shabbat. They can't cook the food on Shabbat. They're only allowed to do it within the framework of the prohibitions of Shabbat. But the work that they're doing, they're working, a waiter serves, cleans up. They're allowed to do that. But are they allowed to get paid for it? No. But for the sake of a mitzvah, we do make allowances, and they get paid for the preparation time, they get paid for cleanup time after Shabbat, and it's sort of swallowed up within the larger contract. But for it to be designated as payment for, okay, Shabbat between 2 and 4, I want you to clean the floors, that's prohibited, even if it's for the sake of the mitzvah. If it's earmarked specifically as work on Shabbat, as payment for the work on Shabbat, you're not allowed to receive it, even if it's for a mitzvah. So as I said, we sort of use a loophole that we cushion it. We sort of include it together with additional payments for not specifically work done on Shabbat. But that's only for the sake of the mitzvah. But otherwise, don't work on Shabbat. Okay. Now this is a critical point to understand here. The Karaites didn't agree with the rabbis on this one. But Baruch Hashem, Rabbinic Judaism is very, very clear. The way we have been living Judaism for thousands of years is that what's prohibited on Shabbat is what you do on Shabbat. What a person, the acts that a person performs on Shabbat. That's what's prohibited. So what do? We flick on the lights before Shabbat starts. The lights continue to burn. We light a candle for the Shabbat candles. But the candle's burning on Shabbat. Okay, but I'm not lighting it on Shabbat. I lit it before Shabbat. Even though it's your candle's burning. It's your wax. It's your oil. Doesn't matter. If you set that in motion when Shabbat did not yet enter, it's kosher. It's allowed. Okay? It says at the bottom of page 39, prohibitions on Shabbat are only relevant to actions performed on Shabbat and not to activities that take place automatically during Shabbat. According to Beit Shammai, it's different, but the halacha follows Beit Hillel, and therefore we set up the timers many times. Turns the lights off, turns the lights on, turns off. I have an irrigation system. You're not allowed to water plants on Shabbat. But I have a computer that turns the tap on and off, and so I hear it going on. The plants are getting watered now. On Shabbat. Strange. For me to take a watering can and to pour it onto the flowers on Shabbat would be a violation of Shabbat, biblical violation. You're not allowed to plant, and you're not allowed to water the plants, but I'm not doing it on Shabbat. I said it from before Shabbat, and that happens automatically, then there's no violation of Shabbat. There's a problem if the machine makes noise, like a grinding mill. It makes a lot of noise. That ruins the atmosphere of Shabbat. Some people say that's prohibited. And that's why I sent to you the other day, we usually don't want to put on a TV or a radio on a timer and have it play on Shabbat because the noise violates the atmosphere of Shabbat. Anyways, okay, boating is another topic we're going to skip. You have to make sure if you're traveling by plane that you land before Shabbat. I had an interesting question. A former student here. He asked me, I booked a flight to go back to America. He booked it for Sunday, 2 weeks ago. He got on the plane. It was one of the last flights out before the war. They closed everything down. He got on his flight, but he asked me, could he get on the flight? Because when he booked it, he didn't realize that he'll be landing in New York on Sunday. What's the problem with landing on Sunday? 2 days of Yom Tov in America. It was Simchat Torah on Sunday in America. So you can't travel. So I told him he has to stay in the airport. He left on Sunday. He's Israeli, lives here. It's a regular weekday. But he flew into a country where it's a Yom Tov. So you're not allowed to violate the Yom Tov in a country where everybody else, all the other Jewish people should be not violating the Yom Tov, not traveling. So he stayed in the airport. And he accepted the psak.
He slept in the airport?
I'd asked him first, is it okay? Can you change your flight? He said $500. $500, he took a book. He said, I like airports. He sat there until the Yom Tov was out in America. And then he went to his home, to his family, and they're happy that he was there. And, he's missing the war. Baruch Hashem, he's not a soldier, so at least he has a quieter time of it. But anyways, when you travel, you have to think about getting there, not just leaving. You leave Eilat a minute before Shabbat, you're not going to get to Jerusalem. It's a 4-hour drive. You have to leave very early in the morning. Make sure, some of the rabbis, he says, he quotes here Rav Eliyahu, he would always tell people, give yourself double the amount of travel time you usually expect it to take. Make sure that you arrive before Shabbat. All sorts of... I have a student who called me from the bus. He was held up. I think he was a soldier at the time. I can't remember now. And he was traveling. He was trying to get to Jerusalem. I think he was trying to come back to Machon Meir. And it got delayed. The bus got delayed for whatever reason. It was traffic. I don't know, whatever it was. And he realized that it's getting dark. And luckily there was a few other religious Jews on the bus. They all realized that, okay, we're not getting to Jerusalem before sundown. They got off the bus at a stop along the way. It was a religious yishuv. They walked into the yishuv like 10 minutes before Shabbat. People brought them into their homes, and they had a nice Shabbat. They understood what had happened. They got stuck on the way. They spent Shabbat with strangers who took care of them. It was a beautiful thing, but they did the right thing. You have to get off the bus. The bus driver doesn't know from Shabbat. In this case, he was doing his route and he continued, and there's some secular Jews who didn't care, and they continued on the bus. But if you're not allowed to drive on Shabbat. I'm not talking about 2 weeks ago, my son drove on Shabbat. I took him into the army for the sake of if you're called to the army, you have to drive on Shabbat. But if it's just to get to your comfort of your Shabbat plans, you can't continue. It's a famous story about it's happened in America 50 years ago or so. Shlomo Carlebach was a Jewish singer, and he was going for Shabbat with a group of his groupies. He had it's the 60s, I think. So he had a group of their groupies on the bus. They had their own bus, like a hippie bus. You know what I'm talking about? During the 60s in America, they had these buses painted with peace signs, and But he was a leader of this Jewish sort of Baal Tshuva movement among the peaceniks, and so they were scheduled to go and spend Shabbat in a certain community, and they were late. And Shlomo Carlebach was a rabbi; he knew the laws, and they're expecting them in this community. It was a Reform community, but it was getting dark. So he said that this Hasidim, okay, guys, sorry, we gotta stop the bus. They got off the bus. They stopped the bus. This is families with children, and they started to walk. He didn't know where he was and how far it was. He said, "Okay, we'll walk until we get there." The people from the community that was expecting them, where's the rabbi? Where's the singer? Where's the? So they sent somebody. In those days, they didn't have cell phones. Sent somebody by car to see maybe they stopped on the way. It turned out they were like 2 hours out. 2 hours out. And it turned out the people who were involved in this community, they had a connection to a radio announcer who was on a radio show. And it's a beautiful story. So the radio announcer told, there's this thing down Highway 6 where there's this rabbi and this group of family, and they're walking, and it started to rain. And they're walking in the rain, and people are offering them lifts. They say, sorry, it's Shabbat, we're not getting into the car. And they're walking in the rain, and this radio announcer starts to tell people that this is happening, and people, locals, even non-Jews, went out to see this crazy event. And they joined. So it turned out not 20 people were walking, 50 people were walking, 100 people were walking down the highway for 2 hours in the rain. And finally, they get there. It was like a whole event. It was on all the news stations in this rural part of America, And so they get there, and they say good Shabbos, and they started Shabbat. It was 11 at night, and they started. They sang about Shabbat, and they prayed. And finally, they had a meal, and it was a whole event. So yeah, you have to be careful to make sure that you can get to where you're trying to go to before Shabbat starts. It's part of preparing for the Shabbat, and of course, this is when push comes to shove. You have to stop the car. Stop the car as soon as sundown. Okay. Now, chapter 3, we're going to learn a little bit exactly when. When does Shabbat start? Because you think it's a simple question. It's actually quite complicated to figure out when the day begins and the day ends. Now, we all know. What does it say in Bereshit? We read it last week. Vayierev vayiboker yom echad. Vayierev vayiboker yom sheni. Vayierev vayiboker yom shlishi. What does that mean? It was night and there was day 1. It was night and there was day 2. Night, day 2. It's remarkable. There was night and there was day. When does the day start in the Western world? Midnight, right? The secular calendar goes midnight is the beginning of the calendar day. But not in Judaism. In Judaism, it begins with the evening. The day is a 24-hour day. It starts from nightfall. But midnight, I guess, is a little bit easier to figure out. Also, midday is easier to figure out. You look at the sun. See, when it's directly above, that's midday. That's 12 o'clock, midday. And the opposite of that is at midnight. You can't see the sun, but you can calculate it maybe. But when it gets dark, so how dark is dark? Right, the sky slowly gets darker and darker, until it's a process. Sometimes it takes more than an hour and a half. Summertime versus wintertime. Higher altitude, geographically higher latitude and longitude. It makes a difference where you are on the globe. In Sweden, I have a brother-in-law who lives in Sweden. Sometimes Shabbat starts at 2 in the afternoon and finishes at 3 in the afternoon. In the summertime, right? Yeah. You're from Sweden, right? And the wintertime starts at 8 at night. It finishes after midnight, or 11 o'clock at night. Very strange. The timing is complicated. So that's what we're going to learn next in chapter 3 about Shabbat times. Any questions, comments about what we were talking about preparing for Shabbat? That was chapter 2. We covered it pretty thoroughly, even though we didn't read every word. So let's very briefly talk to you about the Shabbat times. Okay, we have a few minutes now. You ready? Everybody had a piece of cake? Is it good?
Yeah.
All right. So there is every morning sunrise. Let's say 6 a.m. I'm just going to take a standard day. There's one day a year like this. Every other day it changes. But let's say 6 p.m. is going to be sunset. I think this is called the equinox, when the days and night is exactly. So you have 12 hours of daylight, and then from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. you have dark. So it's night and day, 12 hours each. But before the sun rises, what is sunrise? Sunrise is when you have the horizon over here, and the sun peaks up. The first, as the sun is coming up, that's sunrise. And what's sunset? When you have the horizon over here, and the sun sets below the horizon, you can't see it anymore. No more sun. Sun has finally gone down. It's on the other side. Obviously, this is in the east, and this is in the west. In the west, when the ball of the sun, I'll try like this, so you can recognize it as the sun. When the ball of the sun goes beneath the horizon, that's sunset and that's sunrise. But you know, as the sun is rising in the east, it's not nighttime, fully dark, until that ball rises. I don't know if you've ever seen a sunrise. Hopefully, you've been up. Most of you have seen a sunset, right? When the sunset goes, when the ball of the sun goes down, is it pitch black? Oh, there's still some light because the sun is shining its rays into the sky, and there's still some light. So there's light after sunset until we say when it becomes fully nightfall, when the stars appear. Or, you know, say it in the translation from the Hebrew, when the stars come out. The stars come out, that has a Hebrew word. What's the Hebrew word for that? I'll do the Hebrew words in a minute. One second. When the stars come out. So that's, let's say, maybe, I'll say 6:30. Can't see stars right away when the sun goes down. Only about half an hour later. Like I said, it depends on your location and a lot of factors. And it depends if there's a lot of street light nowadays. There's what's called light pollution by the electric lights. So you can't see stars as quickly as you can when you're in the desert. They're totally, no artificial light. You see a lot of stars earlier. So, but let's say apparently when there's no more sunlight in the sky, you start to see the stars. The stars are there all the time. They don't actually come out. They're there, but you can't see them until it gets darker. Let's say about half an hour later, okay? And we have a parallel stage. We call this twilight, right? Twilight. So there's a similar twilight where there is light in the sky. We call it dawn. When the first light breaks, there's some light. It starts to be dark. But you still don't have the ball of the sun. It's not up yet. It has not peaked up over the horizon. So there's this area, this time in between. I don't think it's usually called twilight, but maybe it is. Is there more twilight in the morning? I don't know.
Dusk.
Dusk is at night, I think.
Yeah, twilight and dusk.
Both? Also in the morning too?
No, don't. It's the morning.
In the morning? Dusk? That's what it's called?
No.
Twilight. I don't know. Anyways, there's this time period. So halachically, we have to decide when does the day start and when does the night start. Guess what? There are two opinions. Or there's a debate. And the bottom line is, it depends. There are some issues for which we consider the sunrise and the sunset to be the definition of day versus night. But when push comes to shove, we can be flexible with that and say, for example, you're only supposed to do a brit milah in the daytime. We're only supposed to shake the lulav in the daytime. The mitzvah is a mitzvah of the day. Blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. We wait for the sunrise, blow the shofar, make the bracha. What if you're traveling? What if you're a soldier and you're going to go out to a mission? And you won't be able to blow the shofar after sunrise. Forget about the shofar. Every day we pray. We're supposed to say the Shachri morning prayers. It's supposed to be said after sunrise. What if you have to be at work by 5:30? By 6 a.m., you have to be already working. Some shift work happens. So when push comes to shove, we allow you to pray even before sunrise. Because there is some elements of morning from dawn. So, and same thing at the end. You really should put on your tefillin before dark. If you didn't put on your tefillin, and you see the sun is already set, you can still put on your tefillin for another few minutes. Mincha, you haven't done mincha, you should really finish mincha. It's an afternoon prayer. You should finish it by when the sun sets. But after the sun sets, if you didn't have mincha, you still can. You still have a few minutes. There's some flexibility here. What we're going to see is when it comes to the laws of Shabbat, we have to be very strict. It's a biblical prohibition to do work, to light a fire. We talked more before about using the hot water boiler. It might be a prohibition of Shabbat. We're machmer. And we say that the Shabbat enters with sunset. Let's say you're rushing, you're showering, you're getting your food ready, you're clipping your nails, you're shaving, and you realize, oh, the time is coming. You're on the bus, like we said before, you're driving. If the sun sets at 6 p.m., no more can you drive, no more can you shave, no more can you use the hot water if it's prohibited, no more can you light your candles, even your Shabbat candles. Don't do any melacha once the sun sets. Because the simple understanding is the way we paskin today. I'm telling you, the majority opinion of the majority of communities of the Jewish people of the last 200 years is we consider this to be the primary, and the primary definition of day versus night is sunrise to sunset. And this is something to be aware of. When it comes to prayers, you can be more lenient. When it comes to violating the Shabbat, you have to be done by sunset. Not only that, because it's such a severe prohibition to violate the Shabbat, the sages came along and said, don't do anything prohibited, don't do any malacha for a certain period before the sunset. It's called Tosefet Shabbat, an addition to Shabbat. We're supposed to add on to the Shabbat a few minutes. Tosefet, addition. Leosif, to add. You're supposed to add on to the Shabbat. Most communities, the standard has become 18 minutes. Some communities, it's half an hour. In Jerusalem, 40 minutes before sunset. Rabbi said it's known as candlelighting. What's candlelighting time for Shabbat? You have on the table, you have a few. Here's one, there's two more here, you can take these. This is given out by Machon Meir to its donors. This is a weekly calendar. The bottom, it has, what is the time of Hadlakat Neirot Erev Shabbat Kodesh? What's the time we light the candles? But it's different in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. Why? Because Jerusalem has a custom to take 40 minutes before sunset. In Tel Aviv is 20 minutes, 18 minutes before sunset. And in Haifa, it's also, it's half an hour. So every city, the community took upon themselves a different amount. The standard in most of the world is 20 minutes, and that's when you should be lighting your candles. Now the truth is, what if we're late happens? I have some kids that really have trouble with the clock. I tried everything I can, but they're adults now. They come for Shabbat, the last second before Shabbat. Sometimes it's even after the last second. But they know the law. They learn this law, and they make sure to arrive in their car in time for my daughter-in-law to light the candles at least before sunset. If you're late after candle lighting time, you can still do work. You can still travel. You don't have to get off the bus until sunset. Sunset, they would stop their car as far as they are, and they'd have to walk the rest of the time. Ideally, they should be here earlier, by the time 20 minutes earlier or 40 minutes earlier, depending where you are, so that you light candles at the right time, because we have this additional period onto sunset. Is that clear? Regarding the laws of Shabbat, we're machmir. Now, for other issues, we're machmir in the other direction. For example, So sunset, we say Shabbat entered. But what are the first few things we do on Shabbat? What mitzvot do we do on Shabbat? Friday night. Kabbalat Shabbat. Okay, you can sing Kabbalat Shabbat a minute after sunset. You can do Kabbalat Shabbat even before sunset. You can do it right after candlelighting. You can do Kabbalat Shabbat. What other mitzvot do we do? What do we do Friday night? Kiddush. Most poskim say, don't say Kiddush until the stars come out. You said it's Shabbat already when it's sunset. I've been trying to drive it into your head so clearly that once sunset, you don't light a fire, you don't drive, you don't play with your computer, you don't do anything after sunset. Kiddush should not be said until the stars come out, because there's this period of twilight. So we're machmer in both directions. Regarding melacha, Shabbat starts even, if possible, before sunset. There's a mitzvah to add on. Okay, you didn't do 18 minutes, do 1 minute. At least add a little bit extra onto the Shabbat. But if you didn't, you didn't. But then Shabbat comes. It's Shabbat. You can't do any work. You should still not wait to say Kiddush until the stars come out, until it's fully dark. That's a little bit of a gray area, this twilight. It's a little bit of a gray area. Just for the last thing for today, I want to add some Hebrew words. We're going to go over this tomorrow, and you can ask questions, and we'll discuss it. We're going to see that there's this. What are the Hebrew words for these? Anybody? What's the Hebrew word for sunset? I'll do it in a different color. Right. Shikia. And sunrise? Right, so there's a few words for it. Zericha is the opposite of shkia. It's the rising of the sun as opposed to set. Shkia means to set, setting of the sun. Zericha. It has another name. Many times it's called in the rabbinic literature Netz HaChama. The first glimmering of the sun. Netz means glimmering. Netz HaChama is the same thing, equals. Same thing, Zericha. Okay, Zericha and Shkia. Stars coming out. Set. Ha. Kochavim. Kochavim are stars. And stars come out. And dawn. Alot. Ha. Shachar. Shachar, you know the word shacharit, right? The morning prayer. So the alot, aliyah, the coming up of the morning, we call it, dawn in English. These are the Hebrew words for these 4 times. What about candlelighting? Candlelighting is, I said it to you before, hadlakat nerot, lighting of the candles. And we were looking at the zaman, hadlakat nerot. On Israeli radio and TV, all around the country, the calendars have Zman Hadlakat Nerot, and they announce it on the radio and the news. On Friday afternoon, they say Zman Hadlakat Nerot B'Yerushalayim, this, Tel Aviv, this, Haifa, major cities, wherever it is. This is all a calculation of a few minutes. It's either 18 or 20 or half an hour or 40 minutes before the sunset. We work backwards from the Shekiah. We add a certain time to add on to the Shabbat. That gives it honor. We're going to read about it probably tomorrow. And that's Zman Hadlakat Nerot. So we have 5 words that we learned. One more word here that we didn't translate. This twilight is called Bein Ha Shemashot. It's like between the suns. Why it has that term, I'll leave for another time. But this is the twilight zone. During Bein HaShmashot, as we said, we're machmir. It has the status of doubtfully day and doubtfully night. It might be nighttime, so it might be Shabbat, so you're not allowed to do any work for Friday afternoon. But it might still be daytime, so we don't say the Kiddush yet, until it gets fully dark. So this is a status of safek, a doubt. Okay, so we've 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 2 different words, so there's actually 7 words. 7 Hebrew words you have to know by tomorrow off by heart. You're going to be tested. 7 out of 7, or you don't get any more cake. Okay? Everybody got the 7 words? Bezrat Hashem will continue tomorrow to learn more laws of Shabbat.